When engaging in political conversation, it's common to talk about the right. But what do those two words mean? Our next guest helps answer that question in a recent book. Matthew Continetti is Senior Fellow and the Patrick and Charlene Neal Chair in American Prosperity at the American Enterprise Institute. He is author of The Right, The 100-Year War for American Conservatism. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What motivated you to take a look at basically 100 years or more of conservative history?
Sure. Well, I think it's important for conservatives who tend to have an appreciation for the past, to understand the past and know how we got to where we are. But I'd say that the more immediate reason I undertook this project was after the 2012 election, I became aware of deep-seated disagreements among conservatives. Not only about the Romney candidacy and about the direction of the GOP under Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, but also disagreements between the grassroots conservative voting base and the conservative policy intellectuals and writers that I had spent my career alongside in Washington, D.C. And so as I became aware of this divergence and only watched it grow in the years after the 2012 election, I thought it would be important to kind of return to the roots of this debate. And what I found was that there's always been long-standing disagreements, not just between conservatives, but also between conservative voters and conservative elites in Washington, D.C.
A lot of folks might have thought that 2016 was what spurred this on, but you actually were thinking about this earlier. That's very interesting.
Well, my previous book was about Sarah Palin and the reaction to her, and not only from the media, but also from Republicans. Many prominent Republican politicians and journalists reacted viscerally, negatively towards Sarah Palin. And even in '08, I could see that there was growing numbers of Republicans who were populist conservatives who did not feel that they were represented in the corridors of power within the institutional GOP. So what happened after 2012 just made me more convinced that populism was a growing force in the Republican Party, and I wanted to see where it came from in order to understand where it might be going.
Contrary to what some on the left might say, the right is not one monolithic group that believes exactly the same thing about everything and always has. I'm sure as you worked on this, you found that there were strands that go in a bunch of different directions.
There were, and one of the themes of the book is that the right is not monolithic. And in fact, it's many different factions squabbling over ideas and then also for power. I have to say, though, I was a little bit surprised at the consistency of certain conservative principles over the last century. And that's, I begin my book in the 1920s in order for us to understand why conservatives reacted to FDR's New Deal in the way that they did. And the conservative concern with the size of government, with excessive executive power, with entitlement programs, with high taxes, all of that has been enduring for 100 years now.
You led into my next question because you already talked about core principles. Are there others that seem to unite conservatives throughout the years?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the most basic is a commitment to the written Constitution of the United States of America. Even during the 1930s, you saw conservatives criticize FDR for betraying the Constitution. FDR's folly was his attempt to pack the Supreme Court in 1937, and there all of the opposition, which extended beyond conservatism to FDR's initiative, referred to the Constitution as the document, the institution that the FDR's opponents were trying to protect. So I think the idea of a constitutional conservatism is a core principle. And it's a principle that distinguishes American conservatism from, say, European conservatism, which has tended to be much more rooted in nationality, ethnicity, religion, royalty, the idea of noble classes. America has not had that. Our conservatism, it seems to me, has always been anchored instead in the Constitution and more recently, but just as importantly in my view, in the Declaration of Independence.
Your book is titled The Right, and we've been talking about conservatism. Are the two terms interchangeable, or do we need to make some distinctions?
I try to make some distinctions. I'm not sure how successfully I make them, but the book is called The Right. Basically, the right encompasses any group opposed to the left. That's not necessarily the same thing as a conservative, though. A conservative, like I say, in the American context, tends to see himself as a defender of the Constitution, as a defender of the system of government set up by the founders. And also, a conservative in America tends to value political liberty dearly. You can be on the right, you can be opposed to the left, and not necessarily agree with the ideas of American conservatives. So that's the most fundamental distinction I would make. I guess you could kind of think of it in terms of a Venn diagram, right? Conservatives are part of the right, but the right can also include groups that do not share a commitment to the Constitution and to political liberty.
So we've always seen some differences among people who would be considered on the right, or even among some who would call themselves or be called conservatives. How much did the experience of 2016 and the Donald Trump phenomenon expand on this or make it clearer?
Well, I think the rise of Donald Trump certainly showcased the divisions within the Republican Party and also within the conservative movement. It's important not to confuse the two. The Republican Party and the conservative movement are different things. It took a lot of effort for the conservative movement to plant its foot inside the Republican Party. And not every Republican presidential nominee has been a conservative. I think when Donald Trump pointed that out in 2016, he was correct. I think I would say that in many ways, Trump as president governed in a manner that American conservatives could support. And I think here in particular his judicial nominations to the Supreme Court, his tax cut, his deregulatory agenda, his embrace of domestic energy production. These are all long-standing conservative concerns. But Trump has changed the coalition and changed the party because he has also brought in a group that is not ideologically conservative, but is more populist, anti-elitist, and is not that concerned with limiting government, is more concerned about fighting and defeating the cultural left while protecting the benefits it feels are owed to it.
So the book looks back, obviously, it's history, but you write it in some respects so that it helps inform the future. So knowing what you knew, getting the book together, seeing what we've seen in the Trump years and the now Biden years, what does that say about where conservatism stands now and the potential future?
Well, I think it's important for people who are American conservatives in the sense that I've described, individuals who believe in political and economic freedom, who believe that the American tradition is a tradition of freedom, who believe that the Constitution, as originally written and amended, ought to be our lodestar that we protect. Those individuals, and I count myself among them, need to understand that many battles lie ahead, precisely because the Republican Party is not the same thing as American conservatism, or even the American conservative movement. And so I would urge people who do have a commitment to the Constitution and to freedom, liberty, to think of themselves as members of one group in a larger coalition. And that means that you have to be creative, you have to make tough choices, you may find unlikely allies, but the goal should not be the furtherance of any party, or much less any one individual, but the furtherance of certain ideas that can inform public policy and make America a freer and more prosperous land. It means that the work of conservatism is unfinished, and in many ways, the conservatives today are in a position similar to the position of some of their brightest lights of the past.
Given the history, how optimistic are you about conservatism's continued role in American governance and guiding where we go?
Well, I think I definitely am optimistic about the persistence of these ideas and the continuity between the past and the present. There will always be a party of liberty in the United States. That's because we're a country founded on liberty. The difficulty is translating those ideas into public policy. And so I'm a little bit less optimistic about the future of conservatism within the two major parties in the near term. But I think that if we approach the task like our forebears did, we can have great success down the road. The founders of post-war American conservatism, figures like William F. Buckley Jr., they were not interested in advancing a specific candidate or even a party. They were interested in advancing a vision of American life and the place of the Constitution in America, the size and scope of individual freedom in America. And so that meant that they built institutions. They wrote as independent critics and journalists. I think that conservatives today need to take the same approach. They're in it for the long haul, and they need to remain committed to the ideas of human freedom and dignity if they're to find any success.
The book, once again, is titled The Right, The 100-Year War for American Conservatism. Its author is Matthew Continetti of the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.